The Childish Thing by John Metcalfe. The day they heard that Bella, their maid, had died in the hospital, little Dulcie, rummaging about the derelict shed in the woodlot, came upon something odd. At the time, the two things were not very closely connected in her mind, but it is possible she had been prompted to her investigations here and there that evening by a vague idea that something of Bella's, some object of worth or interest, might have been left behind. All afternoon there had been a faint, depressed disturbance, consequent on what had happened to Bella, whose young man cousin had called with the news, and gone away again, after clearing up Bella's room, carrying a corded box. Father had been grumpy, and Mother had pensively taken the trap into Wandleton to the Labour Exchange to try for a new maid. Dulcie, aged 8, had not cared much for Bella, though now she half imagined, as was proper, that she had. Actually, Bella had been a rather sullen, ugly, pretty creature, addicted to cheap finery, and attractive only to numerous undesirables. But Dulcie then was not to know that. Avoiding her elder brother Vic, she had loitered out alone, toward sundown, through the meadow and over the brook, and on into the little lost orchard beyond the spinney, where the disused shed was. And there, poking around inside the shed, she had found the male doll. This doll was not as other dolls. It was of dull, leadenish yellow wax, small but cleverly modelled, despite a misshapenness of one leg, with a grey tuft of beard upon the chin, and, circling the thin neck, a narrow band, it seemed of gold. Dulcie, in the failing light, stood looking at it queerly. It had been lying in a corner, not obvious, but swaddled underneath a pile of litter, rags and sacking, as if hidden there. Just what inspired Dulcie to turn this rubbish over and discover it, except perhaps the general notion that, as the young man cousin had, she was making sure that no stray belongings of the departed maid should remain ungarnered, she could not tell. And now that it was unexpectedly revealed, she had a blankly disconcerted, puzzled feeling, not of delight, and hardly even of excited curiosity or satisfaction, but of a slightly glum, unthrilled bewilderment. This doll, if it was a doll, was too different. It must, she thought dimly, be somebody. It was so lifelike. Vaguely, its lack of orthodox engagingness, its carelessness of the least effort to ingratiate and win her favour by an ordinary dull prettiness, affronted her. And it had startled her too. Instead of her finding it as she had, it was as if it had popped out upon her and taken her by a description of surprise. She was still grasping the object gingerly when she swung around at the sound of footsteps. Vic, having tracked her to the orchard, stumped masterfully in. "What's that?" he said. "Ooh, whatever is it? Here, give it to me. Let's have a squint." "No," refused Dulcie, with instinctive obstinacy. "No." At that moment he did not press his demand, and merely stood at her side, staring with her. Together they marvelled, but as yet, for some reason, with little spoken comment or conjecture. "I'll keep it," announced Dulcie, a shade undecidedly. "I'll call it Umusasaway. It's mine." "Oh, all right," conceded Vic. "You can have the old thing, for a bit anyway. Till I say." She knew that he was only biding his time and holding what he thought his claims upon her in reserve. For quite a while after that, Dulcie used to play, desultorily and when she chanced to think of it, and when mood and opportunity conspired, with the waxen mannequin in the deserted shed. It did not by any means engross her, but she was conscious of it almost uneasily, as of a rather mystifying and irritating something she did not entirely understand, and was not entirely certain what to do about. This uncertainty, shared apparently by Vic, was reflected in the fact that Umusasue's existence continued, hidden from her parents. How had the thing got where it was, and why, in particular, had there been a pin transfixing its left leg? She had not noticed the pin till the day after the doll's discovery, and it was very small. One of those tiny pins that people use for fastening papers. But the pin had been enough to crystallize an attitude and to suggest a line of action, and presently to start her on a train of further imitative prickings. She had no stronger strain of cruelty in her nature than most little girls, yet she did not really like the doll, which was only a doll after all, and to torture it in make-believe was fun. Umusasue, the Red Indian chief of a private legend, had tortured captive palefaces innumerable in the most horrible fashion. Now he was getting paid out. Anyhow, Bella, whoever it was that had him first, had evidently not liked the bearded doll either, and Dulcie was merely following an example. By and by, however, she grew a trifle tired of such pastimes, in a sense because she could not discuss it or play with it openly. The doll was actually a sort of nuisance, and she had thoughts occasionally of just throwing it away. The jabbings, prickings, eye gougings, and other teasings of the mannequin, even to the accompaniment of magic rites and incantations, began gradually to pall, so that she was at length the less inclined to grumble when Vic now and then would grab it from her lap, or to dispute his right to play with it as well. Vic was 2 years older than his sister, going to school each day in Wandleton, while Dulcie so far merely had a morning governess, Miss Todd. He was interested in chemistry, and his designs on Umusasue were probably of the blackest. But by this Dulcie did not greatly care what happened to the puppet, which had suffered so many agonies and minor mutilations at her own hands already. She had, for instance, half lopped an ear, then stuck it on again by melting the wax, and once she had all but singed off the beard with lighted matches. Even if Vic put an end to Umusasue entirely by experimenting or exploding him, she would not deeply grieve. Indeed, it would be almost a relief. On the September afternoon, when she at last resigned the midget to Vic's tender mercies, Dulcie was to be driven into Wandleton by Mummy. Before she raced off to the cobbled side yard where the trap was waiting, she and her brother had been down there together in the orchard shed. He was standing by the narrow, cobwebbed oblong of cracked glass slats that served for window, his blonde curls catching the dusty light. Though he did bully her, she was fond of him, with the uneasy and aggrieved devotion that was a tribute to his power to hurt. "He's mine, remember, old Umo is," she adjured him, in a formal assertion of continued ownership. "You be good to him, mind." Vic grinned. "Oh, I'll be good to him," he answered, ironically, and with a glint in his eye that boded, on the contrary, every variety of ill to the forsaken mannequin. He broke off, all at once, resuming darkly in a lower tone. I believe I know what it is. You don't, do you? You're too little and silly." Dulcie pretended not to hear him. His voice had a funny, hinting and uncomfortable quality. She hoped queerly that he would not go on. But he did. "And I know what that is, too." He pointed to the circlet of yellow metal round the figure's neck. It's a ring. Someone's gold ring. And again she pretended to pay him no attention, and this time he also fell silent. She had felt at his words a sort of shame and disquiet, touched by the vaguest possible breath of fear. "Well, you be good to him," she repeated flatly as she ran out of the shed. She had set off, however, on her drive to Wandleton light-heartedly enough. The air, though warm, was crisp, and the sun rolled along with them, over the trees and hedges. Susie, the chestnut mare, had soon disposed of the 3 miles, but they had been rather late in starting, and Mrs. Hewson, Dulcie's mother, had barely done half her shopping when it was time, they felt, for tea. "We'll have it with the candies," Mummy informed Dulcie, "and then I'll park you there with them just for a few minutes while I finish my marketing. You won't mind, will you?" "Candies?" Dulcie queried dubiously. "Who are they?" "No, you don't know them yet, do you? Except for Mrs. Justin, who was a Miss Candy. They're quite nice. Bella used to work for them, or actually for old Major Candy, before she came to us." "Oh, Bella," said Dulcie. A cloud had gathered, and she was silent and subdued when she was introduced to the Candys, and while she was having tea with them, even although Mrs. Justin, whom she liked, happened to be there as well. "Father's not quite up to joining us," explained Miss Laura Candy. "It's his leg again, chiefly. Such a time of it he's had lately, with one thing after another. But I'm sure he'd love to see Dulcie and show her his curios now she's here." So while Mummy was completing her purchases in town after tea, Dulcie was shepherded upstairs to Major Candy. "I'll run down again and leave you two to yourselves," Dulcie heard Miss Laura saying directly. "Father'll show you his African assegais and heads, and you can tell him all about the farm and your drawing lessons with Miss Todd." In truth, Dulcie had been in too much of a daze to catch more than a word here and there of Miss Laura's sprightly chatter. She, Dulcie, was staring in an utterly electrified manner at Major Candy. A shiver of astonished suspicion had darted through her the moment she entered the room and saw him. Now she could not keep her eyes away from him, or her mouth from gaping. "How do you do?" the Major had said, but she had not answered. Miss Laura had gone, and he looked at Dulcie with a puzzled and rather wry expression. "Well, young lady," he said dryly, "you'll certainly know me again. What is it? Haven't I washed my neck, or what?" Acute embarrassment added itself to Dulcie's other emotions. "No, she managed to stammer. She forced her gaze downward to the carpet. "Shy, eh?" said the Major. "Don't be like that. I like little girls. And I don't bite 'em. So if people tell you I do bite 'em, just don't believe 'em, what?" "Yes," said Dulcie. "I know, By an effort she listened to him, as, hobbling, he wandered to and fro, taking down spears and other weapons from the walls, showing jewellery and trinkets he had brought back from the natives, and horned or antlered heads of animals that he had shot. But all the time, dreadfully, she was peeping at him and covertly considering him. Yes, he was. He was. His lame leg was the left leg. His beard was grey and pointed. An ear, the ear she had snipped off and then stuck on again, was plastered over. Oh dear, she thought. Oh dear. She almost wanted, absurd though that she realised would have been, to touch him and see if it felt waxy. "Ah, there," said the Major, panting. "You'll excuse me if I sit down. Not so well as I used to be. Falling to bits, eh? First a big toe drops off, and then a little finger, what?
Put 'em in the curry next day for dinner, eh? And eat 'em, and pretend to like 'em, eh?
But horribly near the truth as this grim jesting sounded, Dulcie was scarcely attending to what he said. A wheelchair stood in one corner of the room, and to this he now retired, laying aside his crutch stick as he sank into it. He uttered a slight groan.
"Ah, well," he murmured presently. "Mustn't be in the dumps, must we? Never do that. If you're not listening,"
he broke off in testy accusation.
"What in the name of fortune is it?"
A faint communication or reflection of her own terror seemed gradually to alter his expression to one of genuine alarm. Of her own terror, yes, for Dulcie had been putting two and two together and recalling Vic. What she had done to Major Candy's simulacrum was quite bad enough, but in comparison with what Vic had in mind. She heard herself speaking agonizedly. I must go, quick. You're going to be blown up." A pained look was imprinted on the Major's face. As she began to back from him toward the door, he tried in vain to raise from his seat and to detain her.
Wait a bit, don't be in such a hurry. What's all this?
But Dulcie had already darted from the room. Not only did she wish, if possible, to save the Major, but she had no desire to be involved, and at so close a range, in what might be his fate. Dashing down the stairs, she found Mummy in the hall, just returned from her shopping. "Oh, Mummy, let's go, quick, quick!" There was astonishment on all sides, of course, hand-liftings, and a mild consternation. However, it was concluded by the Candys that Father's assegais and skulls must have frightened Dulcie, and she had better have her way. After the hastily apologetic leave-takings, Mummy, putting Susie to a brisk trot, wanted to know more about it, but Dulcie did not tell her. She had heard, without contradicting it, the Candy's conjectured explanation of her conduct, and was glad to seize on it and pretend to agree with it. Mrs. Hewson was surprised. Dulcie had never shown such timidity before. It was very odd, but it would be wiser, perhaps, not to press her, and she desisted from her questionings. Dulcie, meanwhile, gazed ahead imploringly at Lucy's rhythmically swinging rump, as if imploring could have caused it to swing any faster. "Oh, get on! Oh, get on!" she prayed, and as soon as they were home, Dulcie bolted to the shed. Thank heaven she was in the nick of time. Her brother, as she raced in, was busy with something on a low trestle table, in the middle of which, on a small mound of blackish powder, the effigy was lying. From the recumbent mannequin, and attached about his waist, led what looked like a length of orange-coloured cord, its free end hanging over the table's edge, where Vic held a lighted match. "Stop!" cried Dulcie. Don't! It's Major Candy! I've just seen him, and it is!" Frowning, and for a while incredulous, Vic took his match from the fuse, reluctantly blew it out, and listened to her tale. Dulcie's visit to the Candys had the effect of ushering in an entirely new era so far as the history of the waxen puppet was concerned. Her previous barbarities had been sins of ignorance, but now that she was aware of the doll's identity, her treatment of it must need be very different. She trembled to think how narrowly Major Candy, or at least his proxy, had escaped a sulphurous extinction, and, having plucked him from it as a brand from burning, she would make up to him for all the errors of the past. It should be as much fun, or almost, to be good to him for a change, and pet him, get him strong and fit, as to clip off his ear, or singe his beard, or let him be destroyed by gunpowder. In this humaner, more enlightened point of view, Vic finally concurred, though not, his sister sometimes fancied, too enthusiastically. Short of the explosively dramatic curtain of which he had been cheated, he regretted, she suspected, a number of missed opportunities of an alternative and minor but still fascinating character. If the flesh and blood Major Candy had to be allowed to stay alive at all, he might hankeringly have thought, it would have been considerably more interesting and amusing to watch him, following the application of a suitable and nicely graduated stimulus, develop wattles and a comb, or suddenly come out in spots, or grow a horn, than merely, unexcitingly, to keep him well. As to the actuality of the link between the effigy and its original, Vic would not commit himself. He was a curious, indiscreetly probing, and in some ways rather cagey mind. Old for its years, and Dulcie was never quite sure what his real opinion was. It had been he who, prior to her candy visit, had arrived at a comprehension of the doll's true nature. And it was he again who now additionally supplied her with several further facts regarding Bella. One of the daughters, it appeared, of a reputed local witch. Bella herself, moreover, had been dismissed from Major Candy's service after some offence, without a character, a circumstance with which her subsequent employer, Mrs. Hewson, had been remiss in failing earlier to become acquainted. And of course, Vic had judicially concluded, she had a grudge. That was old Candy's ring she stole, I bet, round the thing's neck. Still is his ring, I suppose, if you can put it in anything the fellow's worn, or bits of him, his nail parings, or teeth, or hair. The spell works stronger. Dulcie shivered. What had Bella been like, more exactly? What had she said and done? Memories of the dead girl came back to her, now haltingly, now sometimes in a rush. And then, from thinking of Bella, Dulcie would look at the mannequin, lying on top of the pile of sacking where Bella, it seemed plain, had hidden it before having to be whisked off in a hurry to the hospital. Umusasue, Dulcie murmured dubiously. But the doll was Umusasue no longer. It was revealed as of a stuff considerably more sinister than that. Nonetheless, for a while it could scarcely be denied that Major Candy bloomed and blossomed under the new regime. The mere respite from tweakings and prickings must alone have been enough to gladden him, and when to this were added embowerings in rose petals, gentle formations of fern, sprayings and sprinklings with perfume, immersions in lollipop tea, and finally his decoration with the George Cross for heroism, his bliss can have had no bounds. Such reports of him as came to hand indicated him as much improved in health, in quite a flourishing condition, and indeed positively thriving. So there you were. The spell could be reversed. Bella's odd legacy of hate was turned into an instrument of good, the only pity being, Dulcie often thought, not without conscious virtue, that Major Candy could not guess who were his benefactors. Not that the course of therapy proceeded minus incident or interruption. The puppet survived various hazards. Once the cat got him, sniffing and pawing him suspiciously, though able after an experimental lick and nibble to make nothing of his wax, quickly abandoning him. Once he was dropped into a water butt, and once, a narrow shave, he was all but carted away with rubbish on a general clearing out and cleaning of the shed. The last and barest of escapes had emphasized the permanent, still abiding nature of the problem, and raised, in Dulcie's mind, a serious difficulty. What should she do with Major Candy's effigy, eventually? Surely she could not keep and cosset it forever. Yet if she didn't, what would happen to the Major? Vic, who had diligently extended his researches into the whole subject, had informed her gruesomely that if the doll were buried, or were set to melt at a slow fire, its human counterpart must pine and die of wasting sickness, and so on. What should she do? The implied and rather accidentally assumed responsibility for Major Candy's welfare weighed on her. It was too grave and onerous a trust. If there had been any means of simply nullifying the connection without doing more, and as it were, thenceforward leaving the good Major to his own devices, that would have been ideal. But was there such a means? She could find no solution to the puzzle. "Oh, put it in a bank," Vic suggested flippantly, knowing perfectly well that of course she couldn't. Vic, as an ally in the matter, was increasingly half-hearted. He had lost interest, she divined, in the affair, and perhaps that was scarcely to be wondered at. Dulcie had twice, and Vic 3 times, observed the Major, apparently fully recovered, in the streets of Wandleton. But there was hardly enough in these occasional peeps of him, satisfactory as they were, to nourish and sustain a genuine devotion to his cause. Even Dulcie, too, had to confess that, failing fresh developments, the business was beginning to grow just a trifle stale and wearisome. "Or post it to him," Vic had absently gone on. Post it. Yes, that was better. Dulcie had been shy of repeating her visit to the Candies, but posting, yes, that might be a way out of her quandary. The Major's fate would then be in his hands, and if he was sensible, he could give himself no end of treats. "And he'd get back his crest ring then, too," said Dulcie. "He'd like that. I wonder if he'd wear it again, or let it stay round Umo's neck." Now and then, at odd moments, they discussed the plan, but somehow, as yet, without putting it into execution. Nearly a year had flown since Dulcie had found the doll, and a host of other exciting matters competed for attention. Vic, to his curious joy, was off to boarding school, and presently Dulcie would be going to school as well. They were both growing up, and possibly belief in Bella's magic was not so firmly unassailable as once it was. For the time, at any rate, nothing was done, and the mannequin remembered less and less frequently as the days slipped by, still reposed, hidden, and almost neglected, under its shrouding sacks and mildewed old horse blankets in the shed. But about 3 months later, toward the end of Vic's holidays, and just before his sister was to start her first term, the puppet was recalled. This dilatoriness, Dulcie rebuked herself, could not continue, and the effigy must be got rid of somehow. She was not certain now that posting it to the Major was such a brilliant notion after all. It seemed a bit little kiddish, and might merely annoy him. Yet this scheme of disposing of the incubus had been agreed upon ages ago, and in her mind acquired a sort of fixity and momentum of inertia, simply by virtue, so to speak, of its long-standingness. Anyhow, she could think of no alternative procedure. Accordingly, despite considerable misgivings, and in a hurry with all the packing and other preparations for St. Osyth's, she placed the mannequin in a stout cardboard box, which she committed to Vic for posting when he had the chance in Wandleton. No note of warning or directions was enclosed, though she originally had meditated an explanatory label, "This is you," or words to that effect, but clues of this kind had been quite unnecessary, besides being liable, since Umusasue was something of a caricature, to misinterpretation as a piece of rudeness. The ring, if nothing else, would surely set the addressee on the right scent and tell him who the puppet was supposed to be. Driving to the station with Mummy, she passed near the Candy's house and speculated fleetingly on the Major's probable reaction to the parcel, mailed to him by Vic the previous day. Had there, she mused, been anything in it, in the whole rigmarole of waxen images and spells and evil eyes? It all sounded more and more incredible. One of the childish things spoken of in that passage Daddy had happened to read yesterday at prayers, that people should outgrow and put away. and yet it could not only be coincidence. She thought, frowningly, of the Major's plastered ear, and of his lameness. For every point where she or earlier Bella had misused the mannequin, there was a scar of some disfigurement or answering disability. But she was in far too great an eager, anxious flutter and increasing mental turmoil over her new beginning life at school to ponder such a relatively unimportant matter more than a few moments. It was not until her first term had been survived, and even not until several days of the ensuing holidays had sped by too, that she again recalled the doll. "Vic," she said suddenly, conscious of a slight stab of guilt at her forgetfulness. "Oh, I wonder how old Major Candy's getting on." Vic's school had broken up almost a week before hers, so he had the advantage of her as regards local news. They were strolling in the orchard, near the shed. He glanced at it now, and an odd expression crossed his face. "Oh," he said. "I thought you'd heard." "He died, you know." "Died?" asked Dulcie blankly. "Yes, well, he was pretty ancient, really. But he burned himself. There was a fire. Quite a lot of their house was burned out too." "How did it start?" She had a sick feeling, half guessing. "How did the fire start? Was it because of what we sent him?" "Well, yes, it was, in a way. When he opened the box, he was so angry and so disgusted, just at the silliness of it, I suppose, that he must have got into one of his tempers and chucked the thing in the fire. He always was a peppery old boy, they say. Of course, with the wax, there was a tidy blaze. His clothes must have caught alight or something, and when they found him, he was just lying down." Oh dear, how horrid." "Well, Dulcie, she was crying." "Oh dear." Vic looked undecided whether to be annoyed with her or afflicted by her tears. "Oh, I shouldn't worry too much if I were you. Why, you only saw him once in your whole life, to speak to, I mean. It's not your fault, anyhow. And all that about images and spells and magic is sheer bosh. But it spoiled everything, and it kept on being true," said Dulcie, gulping. "Even then, right to the finish. When the wax man was burned, so was he." "Oh, don't," implored Vic. "Don't be so silly. I'm sorry for the old chap, of course, but it was an accident, pure and simple. If he hadn't been so furious about how ridiculous the superstition was, it wouldn't have happened. That was it, don't you see? I can just picture him cursing at the parcel when he'd opened it." Dulcie, unconsoled, did not answer, for this line of reasoning seemed somehow to defeat itself and only lead back to the enigma. She gazed up at the evening sky, where a piled rack was driving. Amber and rose and amethyst were in it, as the clouds reeled smoothly on like gliding figures in a carnival procession, drawn as if on rails invisible to the land's rim, spilling their glowing cores, and endlessly toppling there, a stately ferment of every burning hue. "Cheer up," Vic insisted. "You did the best you could. The trouble was that you believed in it too much, I think." He put a hand on her arm, urging her to the house, away from the orchard. But before she left it, she threw one glance behind her at the shed, dark and wizened in the gloaming, knowing that if she could help it, she would never go there again. Today's story was The Childish Thing by John Metcalfe. It was read by Jasper L'Estrange. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, sweet dreams.